Again, my name is Tyler Tenbrink. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition for Piedmont Airlines. I've been with Piedmont for 10 years in various positions, but I've been in the industry for about 20. Went to college at K-State, and that's where I got my degree and my my pilot's licenses. But I'm going to switch gears a little bit about generational topics, and we're going to talk about pilot mental health. It is something that is kind of near and dear to my heart, as well as many of you who have dealt with this in the past. And we're going to go through just some of the safety aspects. We're going to go through actually a case study, and we're just going to go through some of the communication techniques that people are using to treat these things. So if you can't hear the videos, let me know, and we'll try to fix that.
Inside the cockpit of this aircraft, a struggle is going on as the pilots are desperately trying to fight off a man who is trying to shut down the aircraft's engines.
What happened? He tried to shut the engines down.
But the story that has led up to this terrifying ordeal is far more complex than you might think and has ramifications that should ripple through the entire aviation industry.
I am not okay. I need to wake up.
Today I will tell you a story about a crime and a tragedy. And this story will point to a system that is broken and that will cause more tragedies unless it's fixed soon. A quick warning, this story will contain references to mental health issues, and I will link to some helpful resources here in the description below.
So how many of you have heard or seen or done any research on that Alaska Airlines flight? It's actually a very interesting topic, and it brought to light a lot of information that we didn't even take into consideration, and it just happened. We'll go through some of the other case studies that are in this as well. But the importance of pilot mental health in the industry right now, we all know our mental health is critical, right? It is part of our checklist. It is part of something that's made up of our beings, and we need to understand what that means and how it directly impacts us and our passengers. It's an underreported issue. That is something that, and do we all know why it's underreported? You're going to lose your medical, right? So we have not made this easy. The FAA and those that are the governing bodies of all of this, we tend to just hide what's going on. We don't report it. We don't tell anybody. We just kind of suck it up and deal with it, right? You fall down, you dust it off, you get up, you go on, right? And it's an industry challenge. Addressing mental health is essential for the future of aviation because we know it's a problem. And as we go through generational changes, like Jonathan just talked about, me being an elder millennial, I sit on that cusp of Gen X and millennial. We weren't as medicated as people are now. We went through the whole medication technique of, okay, well, this kid's really hyper. We're going to just throw medication at it, right? Before then, I wasn't a medicated child, and I probably should have been at some point, but I wasn't that person. So those are pieces of the challenge, and as we go further in generations, as they become pilots or they're working for the airlines, you're going to find more and more of this. So a change has got to occur because we're just not going to have people that weren't medicated or did not receive therapy as a kid, and it's already in their medical history. So one thing that we try to educate people on, especially at the airlines, is you need to tell your AME or you need to start working on this now before it becomes a problem later. So you're going to go spend $100,000 on your career, and then all of a sudden you can't fly anymore. So having that conversation early with anybody that wants to start this career is going to be highly important. So challenges in seeking mental health. There's always the stigma, right? That is the key to this. It's the fear of being seen weak or unfit to fly. However, 1 in 5 adults have an undiagnosed mental health condition. So that's an interesting. Think of 1 in 5 people in this room have one. And the career impact, the concerns about losing the medical certification for the job. I mean, that's half the reason people don't report is because it's going to end their career or they think it's going to. And then once you have it reported or it's been found out, the regulatory hurdles to get your medical back are unfathomable. And I am one of those people. I do not have a medical because of a medication I take. And I think it's important for those of us that have dealt with this. It's more important for me to speak about it so people know that it's a possibility, that it can happen to you, versus just hiding it and suffering on your own. I've helped numerous people try to get their medicals back using the resources that we have and being able to push them through. Though I haven't done it for myself, and I could. I am later on in my career. I love what I do. I don't feel that I need to, but at that same time, I can sit here and talk to students. I can talk to pilots. I can talk to anybody about that because I'm not afraid to. There's nothing stopping me. But those of you that do hold medicals, be very careful about it. And you have to be very careful about it because if the wrong person finds out, it could end your career. And then obviously the financial worries. You lose your job, you're not getting paid, and then that becomes an even more depressing factor. So there's a lot of things that go in here with mental health and the challenges that it creates.
Today, we're diving into an important topic affecting pilots and aviation professionals: healthcare avoidance behavior. Pilots and controllers must meet strict medical standards to maintain their required medical certification. This medical certificate is obtained from an aviation medical examiner, or AME. An AME is a Federal Aviation Administration designee, not a federal employee. Pilots visit their AME regularly to disclose any health changes and undergo a screening examination. This screening is an occupational exam. You either pass or fail. It is not healthcare. If an aviation professional reports a new symptom or diagnosis, they might face temporary or even permanent loss of their medical status. This can lead to additional medical testing costs and loss of income, especially for professional aviators. Aspiring aviators may not be allowed to pursue their dreams. Studies show that over half of pilots exhibit something called healthcare avoidance behavior. This means they avoid seeking medical care or disclosing health issues due to the fear of losing their certification. In fact, 56.1% of U.S. pilots reported some form of this behavior, and 60% admitted to delaying or foregoing medical care because of the risk of certificate loss. Healthcare avoidance can involve seeking care from non-doctors, flying an aircraft without a proper medical checkup after new symptoms or medication, or misrepresenting or withholding information on medical forms. Research shows pilots are more likely to delay seeking care. When experiencing chest pain, they are up to 3 times more likely to avoid care compared to non-pilots. But there's hope. 75% of pilots who avoided care said they'd seek help if there were alternative interventions without the fear of negative repercussions. This highlights a strong willingness to seek support. Aviation professionals are eager to receive the care they need, but a significant systemic change is required. At Clear Skies Ahead, we focus on raising awareness and funds to improve aeromedical certification and encourage aviation professionals to actively engage in their healthcare. Together, we can make a difference. Awareness is the first step in systemic change. Join us in working toward a better system that supports the aviation community and enhances health and safety. Clear skies ahead. Let's navigate to a healthier future.
All right, so healthcare avoidance. That was something that we just talked about and is something that we have probably all dealt with in this room. I mean, I don't know how many times I was like, I've got some weird pain in my side and I think I'm dying, but I'm not going to go to the doctor because I don't really want to know. My dad is the same way, and I'm quite sure all of you have probably done the same at some point. However, it is very, very apparent in the aviation world when people have an issue, they don't report it. 60.1% of pilots report delayed or avoiding medical treatment. And that's one of those things where it becomes an issue, and it becomes a worse issue as time goes on, especially if the diagnosis is going to be heart disease, lung disease, your chances of heart attacks, things like that are always going to be of concern. Surprisingly enough, female pilots are more likely to withhold information about their mental health. How many people know why? Shout it out. There's that. It's because women tend to feel that they are, as I pick, there we go, because they already are facing a stigma within the industry that their male counterparts do not have to face. So they think that admitting that they have a mental health issue is just prolonging or actually extending that same idea further and further. So women go more unreported than men. So that brings to underreporting. Mental health issues go unreported to the FAA. That's just clear and plain and simple.
A major issue in aviation culture is the distrust in the Federal Aviation Administration's aviation medical process. This distrust is driven by a lack of information or misinformation about FAA policies and procedures. This leads to underreporting and causes individuals to avoid healthcare and withhold physical and mental health information. This practice, known as firewalling, involves keeping medical concerns, treatments, and records separate and unreported to a FAA-designated medical examiner. The aviation community also lacks mental health literacy, which creates apprehension and a culture of mental health avoidance. Many believe that the FAA demands extensive evaluations for any disclosed mental health issue. This distrust is fueled by stories of pilots and controllers facing lengthy and complicated processes. Additionally, they are hesitant to discuss mental health conditions, fearing negative repercussions. This fear leads to non-reporting and reluctance to seek help. The culture of professional aviators and controllers emphasizes strength, resilience, and decisiveness. However, it has also fostered the practice of firewalling information, perpetuating healthcare avoidance. Many pilots and controllers tie their self-worth to their job and professional reputation, avoiding anything perceived as a weakness. This cultural barrier to mental health reporting is extensive and requires significant effort to overcome. All aviation stakeholders must collaborate to create meaningful change. Despite the challenge, the aviation industry has shown the ability to change its culture through programs designed to enhance safety in the national airspace system. Together, we can make a difference. The first step in change is awareness. Like, share, and subscribe. Join us in making aviation safer for everyone. Safer skies through research, education, and support.
So, the FAA itself, its current approach on mental health is it's diagnosis focused. So, meaning that the emphasis on identifying specific diagnoses or conditions that someone would have. Self-disclosure, it heavily relies on that. So you have to self-report that information to your doctor or AME. And then you have to go through lengthy evaluations. Hence why we all avoid doing this. We do not want to have to go through this last part. The lengthy evaluations are killer. Having to go through this myself, I will tell you that lengthy evaluation, that's an understatement. It takes years. And it takes even more years on top of that, waiting for responses for information that you've already provided, but they want it in a different form. So that's why we end up having this approach and people stop talking about it. See if that'll go.
Aviation authorities around the world, including the FAA, have for many decades before been using the better safe than sorry attitude when it comes to mental illness and have put very stringent medical requirements in force to keep these types of issues out of the cockpit. This has meant that once diagnosed with a mental disorder, especially if there's medication involved, the road back to the cockpit have traditionally been very long and complicated, with several hoops that the pilots would have to jump through, including sometimes long waiting times for evaluations, on top of course, the already very heavy stigma that mental disorders carry. And even though this has likely improved during the last few years, with the FAA even approving some milder antidepressants for pilots back in 2010, the stigma is still very much real, and with this in mind, there is a strong tendency for pilots to avoid seeking help, even when it's obvious that they should. Now, I know that there are likely quite a few of you out there thinking, good, I don't want any depressed pilots flying my aircraft and we need stricter rules. But whilst that is a very understandable first reaction, it is also an extremely dangerous one. Pilots are human beings, just like everybody else, and even though we have to go through stringent evaluations before we get our jobs, that doesn't mean that we are less susceptible to mental issues later on during our lives. A loss of a child or a spouse, extreme financial stresses, or indeed a constant work pressure and changes in sleep rhythms can all be triggers for depression. And even though it is not more common among pilots than other groups, I don't think that it's more rare either. So with that in mind, what do you think happens when a pilot starts feeling that help is probably needed, but at the same time, he or she also knows that seeking that help might mean a substantial loss of income or even permanent loss of license and career? Yeah, the problems might well be hidden, swept under the rug and possibly never properly dealt with. Or, in the worst case scenario, the pilot might even start self-medicating to get some relief. And the stricter the rules become, the more these problems will be driven underground, meaning that more pilots with perfectly treatable initial issues might not get the help they need, leading to even worse future symptoms. So this really puts the focus on how the aviation authorities out there deal with this problem going forward. For this to get any better, they have to convince the pilots that they can and should seek help when needed, and that there is a true and believable way back to the cockpit if they do. Now, of course, there will be psychological problems that might be deemed so bad that they are completely incompatible with the pilot job, but they are in the vast minority here, and the only way to find those individuals is for pilots to trust the system enough to seek help in the first place. The first officer who flew Germanwings Flight 9525 straight into a mountain in France back in 2015 had been diagnosed with depression very early on in his career, and then he was allowed back with a clear restriction in his certificate saying if this depression ever comes back, he would permanently lose his medical license. If you get a restriction like that in your license, do you think that you would ever officially look for help again? Or
So interesting concept, right? So they put it in his medical that if he were ever to have a relapse in the depression, he would lose his job. How many of you would report that if you ever had that come up again? If you were a commercial pilot, that was your livelihood. Yeah, I don't think I would have either. And honestly, I would love to think that I'm an upstanding person and that I actually would. And knowing what I know now, I may have a better option. However, when that occurred in 2015, there wasn't a better option. And if we go back further than that, when we all started looking at pilot mental health, it actually started occurring in 2012 with JetBlue 191. This pilot experienced a mental health crisis on board the aircraft. Actually, people are even talking about maybe even hallucinations, but there was a lot of talk about religion. There was a lot of talk about Hezbollah and 9/11. And the first officer ended up tricking him to getting out of the cockpit. He was restrained by the passengers. And then the industry impact was, just like you're seeing with Germanwings and what you're seeing with the Alaska Airlines flight, is it sparked discussions on mental health. However, in 2012, no one really wanted to talk about it. It was swept under the rug. No one really knew. It is what it is, and we moved on with life. So with Germanwings, he was just talking about that. The co-pilot deliberately crashed the plane. He had a history of mental health issues. Obviously, it was in his medical record. And this indeed led to increased focus on pilot mental health screening on the global side. But what you're going to see is that mental health on the global platform it's actually much more ahead than the U.S. than in the UK and in Europe. UK and Europe. They actually have made substantial progress in their rules and regulations for medical when it comes to depression and mental health issues. So, 2059. So this was last year, 2023. Joe Emerson got into the cockpit. He was coming back from being off. He was in the jump seat on his way home, and he attempted to shut down the engines mid-flight. So there was a quick response. He pulled the T-handles, tried to blow the bottles, and shut the engines down. The pilots actually caught him, and then shoved him out of the cockpit. Emerson was put back, and he was basically tied down in the back of the aircraft. And he finally came to. He realized what was going on, but he thought it was just a dream, like you heard in the videos. This highlighted another piece for us, another event, another problem with mental health, and now this is brought up into the FAA, ARC, and the aviation rule committees to further advance this. We'll hear a little bit more.
The jump seating pilot's name was Joe, and Joe knew already from the 5th grade that all he wanted to do was to become an airline pilot. He was absolutely fascinated with aviation and everything around it, so when his parents gave him a test lesson as a present, they really sealed the deal. This was what he was going to do with the rest of his life. Back then, he was also relentlessly teased in school by some of the kids, and to help him deal with that trauma, he got into contact with a therapist for the first time, which helped him tremendously. Just like most people who have been bitten by the aviation bug, Joe then spent most of his free time trying to come up with ways to earn money which he could spend towards flying lessons. He was really industrious and even put ads into the local newspaper letting people know that he could come over and mow their lawns and do other type of chores just to earn money to pay for his training. In short, he did everything he could to reach his goal, and all of this sounds exactly like my own story and how I got into aviation. He eventually started his flight training when he was just 15, got his first license at 17, and after he had finished college, his dream came true when he landed his first commercial airline job flying for Horizon Air. He worked for them for a while and then changed over to Virgin America, and after they had been bought by Alaska Airlines, he eventually rose to the rank of captain and later even instructor, initially on the Airbus fleet. During this time, he also met his wife and started a family where he eventually became the father of 2. And he was universally seen, both by his family and colleagues, as a well-balanced, calm and level-headed person. Someone you could trust and who wanted everyone well. His career was going great, and the fact that he had managed to become an instructor meant that he could stay more days at home with his family, which he felt was super important. Again, that sounds exactly like me. Everything was going fine for Joe, until in 2018, his best friend, who was also the best man at his wedding, suddenly died during a work trip to Hawaii. Joe helped bring his body back home, and this sudden shock of grief hit him really, really hard. So hard, in fact, that he decided to go back into therapy again. His therapist soon recognized that the problems Joe was now dealing with went beyond just normal grief and started to look more like the early onsets of clinical depression. This was likely something that he had been struggling with without really realizing it for a long time at that point. Depression, or major depressive disorder, is one of the most common mental health issues that we have, and it will affect between 5 and 17% of all people out there at some point during our lives. The therapist told Joe that she couldn't give him a formal diagnosis, but that she felt that he would do well in talking to a doctor who could give him that diagnosis and maybe even prescribe some antidepressant medication. But here we get to the problem. After he had heard this, Joe did some quick research which showed that any use of antidepressants would likely mean that he would temporarily lose his medical certificate and be grounded for an unknown period of time.
How many of you can relate to that story? I know that, many of you probably have had a personal struggle, had mental health issues, he went into some substance abuse. The psychedelic mushrooms that you'll hear about are going to be a contributing factor to this. And then he also has a recovery journey, which is very interesting. But when I look at this, I've heard this story countless times. I started as a young age. I wanted to go take a flight. I worked mowing lawns and selling chocolate bars and all this other stuff just to end up like all of us, right? And what's concerning to me is that he saw a therapist and it was still not reported, right? And then even the therapist was giving him advice to go seek medical assistance to get on antidepressants, but his concern was automatically, I'm not going to do that because I can't do that.
You see, Joe, after having been scared off by his research into what might happen if he were to use medication, decided not to go to a doctor, but instead to try more intense therapy. He also sometimes self-medicated with alcohol when he had a couple of days off, but never in connection with his flying duties. He was really careful with anything that had to do with his job, and he always followed all of the rules and regulations out there. His medical certificate was therefore kept valid throughout his difficulties, with no trace of any issues being noticed by either his friends nor his colleagues. His wife had at some point tried to get him to see a doctor to get some help after he had confided in her, but he had then explained that he didn't want to risk their livelihood and his dream by doing so. So instead, he just soldiered on, and during the year leading up to the incident, his workload kept steadily rising with the increase in passenger travel after the pandemic, plus the fact that he had to change over to the Boeing fleet, which meant a new typewriting course, who kept him away from his family for most of the summer. He was also appointed safety representative in the San Francisco base, with the role of trying to increase overall safety awareness among the crews, including to get them to file more safety reports. And then, in the end of October, he did the fateful trip together with a group of friends up to Washington State for a memorial get-together for his best friend, something that they had started doing the previous year and wanted to make into a tradition. During the Friday night, as the group of friends were sitting together and having a couple of drinks, someone in the group suggested that they should try psychedelic mushrooms. Joe was very hesitant since he knew the rules regarding drug use. He would normally even avoid second-hand marijuana smoke since it might show up in the random drug tests that airlines do, and he never used any medication at all if he could avoid it. But his friends convinced him that the mushrooms were completely safe and that they wouldn't appear in any type of drug tests. On top of that, he was not scheduled to fly for another 6 days, and the effect of the mushrooms should only last for a few hours, so this shouldn't be any kind of problem. With all of that in mind, and in his overall state of grief and sadness, he took the decision to try a bit of the mushrooms, which was of course a major lapse of judgment.
So, major lapse of judgment. Someone that is, head of the safety committee, knows and avoids marijuana smoke, is pretty upstanding when it comes down to it, decides to take a psychedelic mushroom. Now, psychedelic mushrooms, obviously natural, something that, that people have done for years and years and years, and the airlines do not drug test for it. So in the back of my mind, as that was probably his thought, is I'm going to try it, I'm not going to get hurt by it, and no one's ever going to find out. Lo and behold, it did. And what we're finding is that the mental health piece of this was self-medication. He took it upon himself to either drink or take a drug to see if it would make him feel better. And understanding that he was with his friends, and if you delve deeper into this story, which this is a hour and a half long video, actually talk about the marijuana that was used in the presence of him. His friends were having a good time. You could obviously tell it was a celebration, but he was already depressed. And knowing what depressed people do is they look for an out. They want to not feel anymore. They don't want their mind racing. He would try anything to stop that. So whatever was going to lift his mood was going to work. So unfortunately, he made the wrong decision. And someone that is from the safety side of the house, knowing what I know about him, it had to have taken a lot for him to take that piece of mushroom and not realize what it was going to do. And those of you, I've never taken mushrooms. I don't know what it's like, and I'm sure that most of us haven't. But I would think if you hear something that says psychedelic, I don't know how long that's going to last. And so if you're going back to work in 6 days, yeah, maybe it'll wear off. But if you're traveling as a non-rev, you never know who you're going to run into. So that's a pretty interesting piece of that as well. So the advances in mental health policies that have occurred is pilots with mental health concerns face limited options. They couldn't seek help. Obviously, he did. So the present is it allows psychotherapy under certain conditions, promoting a more open approach. However, we're still avoiding that conversation. The change encourages early intervention and treatment, which I have worked with a few people who have actually taken the steps at different airlines who have taken themselves off of the roster. They have taken a leave of absence because they felt that their mental health was not well, and went on medication to get treatment, told their airline supported them, and they were on an LOA and paid during that time. Now, with that being said, that's not always the case. A lot of airlines do not have those policies. They don't have those leave of absences, or they don't have the representation to make that happen with long-term and short-term disability. The future, we continue to push more progressive policies, including a broader mental health support program and initiatives to reduce the stigma of it. So those of us that have been in the dark for so long that weren't able to get help because we were afraid we were going to lose our jobs, those efforts to educate these pilots are just as important as what we were doing the last time. So those of you that know about mental health and have those conversations with students, be sure to tell them what their options are. So the FAA made recommendations in 2023. So non-punitive disclosures, which means encourage pilots to report mental health issues without fear, which we all know they're still going to fear it. Peer support programs, which are out there. ALPA has a major one. Most major airlines do. And then even with the smaller regional airlines, on my side, we have our own EAPs, and we actually tap into our network with ALPA and American Airlines. So they all have their own peer support systems. And then we are updating our the antidepressant policy, which allows pilots on certain antidepressants to continue flying. And then AME training. So that's one piece of this, is always a training to this, is enhanced mental health training for aviation medical examiners. That becomes an issue because if people don't know, they're thinking of the old ways of doing things. They're basically giving people false hope, or they're taking away the hope that they had. So the ARC final report in 2024, the barriers that were identified, what we talked about: culture, trust, stigma, financial concerns, process, complexity, and they discouraged the reporting. There is a non-punitive pathway. They wanted to create a safe disclosure option without fear of job loss. And then obviously education, which there have been so many advances in the education of mental health for pilots, as it's been talked about for a couple of years now. We want to expand the mental health literacy for all pilots and their supervisors. So the current policy changes: we expanded the list of medications for pilots, including antidepressants. We are ongoing in hiring more mental health professionals for pilot evaluations. And then we're developing more comprehensive mental health screening procedures. Here is the new list of conditionally accepted antidepressants, which has gone from 3 to looking like 9 now, 6, 9, which is great. Obviously, the acceptable antidepressants are there are still unacceptable antidepressants on the market. However, as time goes on, I expect to see those things change.
Stricter rules does not solve the core problem here. Destigmatizing mental health issues and creating well-working peer support programs, like American Airlines Project Wingman, for example, must, in my view, be introduced in every airline. On top of that, working contracts must, of course, allow for pilots to recover properly while still receiving a living pay before they return to the cockpit, and that's sadly not always the case right now. Now, the rest of this story should serve as an example to why these points are so important.
So we've talked a lot about what's going on in the industry as adults, but recognizing mental health issues in student pilots, that's going to be core. And I'll tell you a little story. I was at the UAA policy seminar last year. I'm usually a volunteer when we take students to different aviation-focused government agencies. And we were actually at ALPA this time. We met with the ALPA representatives, and the students were asking questions about their mental health process and how they're helping pilots combat that. And one of the students afterwards came to me and she said, "This is all great and fine, but the problem is I, as a CFI, I have students coming to me asking for help and I have no resources." How many of you have students that know what to do, or do your CFIs know what to do in your flight schools if someone's having a mental health crisis? Anyone? Do you have a program at all? You're not alone. Most people don't, and they don't understand it. And the student, it was very concerning to me that they were basically thrown to the wind. These were kids training kids, and they were supposed to recognize mental health issues in a student that they were training that may have been their age, and they had no resources. So what we are doing is trying to teach students that, or CFIs, that we need to recognize it. And if you can recognize it, then you can lead them in the direction they need to go. So looking at behavioral changes, performance issues, physical systems, and substance abuse. Those are all things that we would look for in ourselves, and we would also look for in a student that we may be a CFI for. So this is an even bigger piece. So this is increased fatigue, difficulty concentrating, irritability, the list goes on and on. These are all symptoms and things that you would see externally from folks about what they may be having a mental health crisis, and you could step in. And this would be the point where you would have to know where your resources are. What do you offer? What can you offer? What can you give the student to help them out? Some students may not have health insurance, and that may be a problem. Some people may not know where to even go, or you may not even be in an area with any mental health capabilities. So looking at this, the biggest piece is suicidal thoughts. And this is a serious sign of distress, and it has to require immediate attention, which we have the resources to do it. It's just about training yourselves and your employees and your CFIs that it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to point them in these directions. So the role of a CFI, or even just as a leader in your company in general, is early detection, open communication, and a referral network. And I can't give you all of those things, but what I can do is encourage you to go and find out what is in your area. You'll leave here today with some information and a reminder of that you need to find these places. So mental health initiatives that you can do within your own businesses is curriculum integration, meaning that you should have these conversations in your training. On-campus resources. I know that there's some collegiate people in here. Your campus does have these resources. Make sure that you are communicating this to your students and having that conversation. There's also wellness programs that a lot of companies do have. I know my company has an EAP. We also have an ERG that help with these things. And then training. If you have the opportunity to take any sort of mental health training, do it. It will give you so much more information than I will ever be able to give you. I'm not a doctor. I would love to be one, but I'm not. I'm just here to give you a little insight to it. And then here's the case studies for student pilot incidents that have occurred. You've all heard them, right? We had one in Florida where a student pilot crashed his aircraft taking his own life, and we knew it. We had one in North Dakota, suicide by aircraft. Another one in Indiana, a student was found dead in a plane crash. All of these things are highlighting the mental health crises that we're seeing in the United States and worldwide that could have been prevented if we saw the symptoms and we knew what to do. So this piece right here is called the Bandana Project. And I brought you all a bandana. And what this is to remind you and your own organizations, you can pass them out, that there are resources for this. So what you should do with this, and the video will explain it a little bit better, is you put this in a very visible spot, like I tie one to my backpack or I have one on my office door, and it just reminds people that, hey, this is a space where you can ask me questions about mental health, and I know where the resources are at to get you help. Doesn't mean you're a doctor, doesn't mean you're a psychologist, doesn't mean you're a therapist. It just gives people the idea that, hey, I know about it and I can get information from you. It's a very easy way for people to recognize it because it's really kind of an ugly green, and it's out there and you can flag wherever you want.
Hello and welcome to the Bandana Project welcome video. This brief introduction gives the background of the project and is encouraged for all incoming members to officially be part of the program. In this video, we will commit to support the mental health of our peers, learn about stigma on college campuses, and join this anti-stigma movement. The Bandana Project is an uplifting and effective grassroots movement that is simple yet powerful. Involved students and staff tie a lime green bandana to their backpack, which signifies that they carry the mental health and suicide prevention resources that are available on their campus. These resources are also shown virtually on the campus-specific page of our website. Please take a moment to pause the video and take a look at the resource card or webpage. The Bandana Project is not a suicide prevention training, and those with bandanas are not trained in crisis intervention or as licensed therapists. Rather, being a member of the program means that, at the very least, you are aware of the resources on your campus and that you are willing to be approached for that information. Most often, this means that you would kindly share a resource card and/or the link to your campus Bandana Project webpage. More broadly, it means that you are willing to have an open and non-judgmental conversation about mental health with those in your life. While the Bandana Project is grounded in some more complex public health theories, it is easy to demonstrate why it is effective in fighting stigma and helping people feel better about getting help on campuses. The Healthy Minds Campus Survey recently found that 37% of college students surveyed displayed symptoms of depression, 31% had symptoms of anxiety, and 14% had suicidal ideation in the last year. Further, 28% of students would not know where to go on campus for their mental and emotional health. Even though it is very common to have mental health concerns, especially while in college, stigma prevents open conversations about mental health and/or suicide. Stigma refers to negative social attitudes and judgments about mental illnesses or those who have them. On any given campus, it can be easy enough as is to feel isolated, but this stigma can cause those with mental illness, or really anyone, to feel even more excluded, judged, or alone. In fact, stigma is the reason why 48% of college students think that if they were to seek help for their mental health, others would judge them. In reality, however, 94% of college students would not think any less of a peer who seeks help for their mental health. But it can be really hard to both see and use that social support. Stigma is one of the most common barriers to getting help for mental health. Overcoming the barrier of stigma can happen in big and small ways every single day, from as little as talking openly to a friend about mental health or seeking help from a professional. Recovery from mental illness is possible with the right help at the right time. The Bandana Project makes clear that nobody on campus is alone, that everyone's life has value and matters, and it gives peers a less intimidating way of helping each other out. On the Bandana Project website, by clicking Find Your School and then General Resources, you can find more general and campus-specific information for both ordinary and crisis situations. Here you can also find this welcome video module. We also encourage you to learn more about mental health and suicide prevention basics through accessing the other modules and content on our site, which may be available to you through your campus. These modules can help anyone watching to learn something new about mental health and suicide prevention. Thank you so much for your time and watching this welcome video. If you are a new member, you are now joining thousands of other students and faculty and serving as a source of support on your campus. Together, we can work against this stigma and save lives, one bandana at a time. Please take a screenshot or photo of this last image as certification that you have watched this introductory video.
So now you're walking away with a little something, right? I know that this said campus, and what I thought was interesting is when I started looking through the website and understanding what this project actually was, and then talking to peers at the specific universities that actually have this project going on, is not only is it used for campuses, it's actually used in businesses as well. So what we've done is utilizing this program. You can actually go to this website. Again, it's free. You can read it, you can take the information, and you can utilize it in your own businesses. Those of you that own small businesses, or you work for a company that does not have these large pieces, this is a great resource for you. I know health insurance and education and therapy, those are expensive things, but these little pieces for free are really going to help you and your students and your possible employees. So resources for student pilots, obviously education materials, they're all over the place. That website and then the websites that I'll give you here at the end will give you so much information that can be trusted and you can give to your employees or your CFIs. Counseling services, each local community has counseling services. We also have online counseling services that are free. And then peer support groups, those are part of every organization that you can join. They all have different pieces to them. Some of them are student-led, some of them are professionally led. It just depends on where you're going. And then there are crisis hotlines for those that need it. So preventing student pilot tragedies is always going to be early intervention. Taking a look at all of those pieces that I gave you earlier about the signs of mental health crisis. Support systems, those of you that are using the Green Bandana Project and understanding where to find resources or get help is going to be extremely important in this. And then the destigmatization of mental health issues is going to be key in this. Having those conversations, having those open, honest conversations with your students or your employees about mental health and taking a stand is going to be extremely important as well. So I will tell you that one of my focuses for my team members, I've got 60 recruiters and managers underneath me. And I know that mental health is my top priority, and it's been my top priority since 2022, especially coming out of COVID. So when my team comes to me and says, hey, I need a break, or this is what's going on in my life, I can stop. I have the power to say, I need you to take a break. I need you to take a step back, and I need you to go home. I need you to take a mental health day. Does it mean they have to use their PTO? Does it mean they have to use a sick day? That means that they can go home, they can rest, relax, and then they can come back and talk about it with me. And we can figure out what actually caused it. Doesn't mean I'm a health professional. Doesn't mean I am someone that knows exactly what to do all the time. But just having that conversation with someone means the world to them, and it means they're not alone. So make sure that you're having those conversations. Make sure you're not stigmatizing mental health and putting it down. Just make sure you're encouraging them as they go through it. And then safety protocols. Every one of you all have a fire escape plan, or you have a bad weather plan. Have a safety protocol for a mental health crisis. Know what to do as soon as you recognize it and where to go, and teach your employees how to use it. So, are you in the green? This kind of goes along with the I'm safe checklist, right? The self-care and peer support fall into the healthy and reacting. So those things can be talked about between each other, but if there needs professional care, that would fall under the injured or ill. So significant functional impairment or clinical disorders, so mental health. So you're just wanting to make sure that that's actually a sticker you can get online, and it's very easy to follow.
There's no question that what he did was wrong, and I am in no way defending it, but Joe never meant to hurt anyone, as he was convinced that he was just dreaming, and he was clearly having a severe mental episode. The way I see it, this serves as a perfect example of what can happen when mental issues are not being treated at an early stage. Imagine a different scenario. One in which he immediately got in contact with a doctor when he felt the onset of early depression, and where the fear of losing his job because of it never entered his mind. Do you think that this would have happened then? In a statement, Joe has said that I'm horrified that those actions put myself and others at risk. He also added, the crew got dealt a situation there is no manual or checklist for, and they did an exemplary job keeping both me and the rest of the people on that plane safe. This quote comes from an interview he did in jail, and they form part of an excellent New York Times article by Mike Baker, which I've linked to below. In that interview, Joe vowed to be as transparent as possible about what had happened, so that we can all learn from this terrible ordeal. He will likely never see the inside of a cockpit again, but in a very ironic twist, this incident and the way his honesty is highlighting the shortcomings in the aviation industry, this might well end up saving more lives than he ever endangered on that day. As an immediate result, the FAA announced that they are forming a pilot mental health committee with the explicit goal of finding ways to break down the barriers that prevents pilots from reporting mental health issues. And they also hope to use this group to help to improve pathways back into the cockpit after a pilot has suffered a mental health episode. Now, what we pilots need to do is to eventually trust that these regulatory actions are effective, start working with the system, and admit when we are not feeling well. We are not superhuman. We do get ill just like everyone else, both in the body and the mind, and we need to remove the stigma that currently surrounds it.
So, I think we just keep on repeating each other. The future of mental health in aviation, we're going to talk just a little bit about this. There's a lot of things that are coming down the pipe. AI monitoring, which is to use and detect early signs of mental health issues. The VR therapy that actually is being utilized right now, where it's exposure therapy, you're basically putting on Google goggles and having an application that induces stress management and exposure therapy. There's also personalized care for individual pilot needs, more specialized, just instead of general mental health, it's focused on a pilot themselves. And then continuous assessment, which is non-invasive mental health check-ins, which is helpful for people to know where they're at in their mental health. So the National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Hotline, this is easy. Something that you can just post wherever in your businesses or talk about. It's call instead of 911, it's a 988, text, or even chat online. And at the very end of this, I'll give you a QR code that'll give you all these links as well. And then destigmatizing mental health in the pilot community. Again, open communication, peer support, and role models. So those of you that have ever experienced a mental health crisis or have had mental health issues in the past, I'm not telling you have to do this, but having that conversation and opening up and showing that you're vulnerable as well is something that I would encourage you to do. We're all adults, we understand it, and we've been through it. No matter what generation you are, regardless of, I'm a millennial and, there's a baby boomer next to each other, we can have that conversation without fear. It's something that even though I've had the issue, you may have not had the issue and you may be older than me, I may be able to walk you through it. Just ask the questions. Be that role model. So any additional next steps, reach out. Obviously, you can always have a mental health professional talk to you about this. Self-care, you need to prioritize it. It's not just generational. Take care of yourself. And then seek support. Don't be afraid to ask for help from any of your peers or anybody that you come into contact with that knows about this subject. And that's the end of the presentation. If you have Wi-Fi, you can use that one. It'll take you to a live link. If you have that one, that'll take you to, if you don't have Wi-Fi, it'll take me to your contact information. Pop a picture of it. The presentation is actually posted online as well. So does anybody have any questions?
Aside, obviously this is a person with a severe mental problem or medical problem. How was this thing treated since he survived and the airplane survived? How was it treated from the legal point of view? Or is this pilot forever never going to be able to live down anything?
He won't be able to live down anything, honestly. He was never convicted of the 83 counts of attempted murder. It was actually dismissed. However, he will most likely never have a medical again. And that is because of the choices he made. There is further information about this, and it actually used to be in this presentation, but it caused so much controversy that I chose not to put it in here. And the controversy is he's now taken the opportunity to, everybody's learning from this, and he's actually created a foundation that actually talks more and more about this. It is so relatively new that I'm not 100% sure that the information that he is giving or what he's trying to do isn't self-serving. Which could turn around and be his way of saying, oh, I made a big mistake, I came back, I did all of these things, and now I want my medical back, right? But you have to think back and look at the questions and the situations that occurred and what decisions he made as a pilot to get himself into that position in the first place. So the problem is, do I want to believe him? Heck yes. Do I think there was a better option? Oh yeah. But I'm not 100% there, and I would like to see where it goes. Would I like to see him back in the cockpit? Possibly. But I think what needs to be done first is we need to all understand what happened, not just say, oh, you made this, you made a mistake, you should get back in. I don't agree with that.
Just like we got a pilot bill of rights, they're in the process of developing a medical bill of rights. And that should be a big help to all of us as well.
The one concern I think that a lot of people are going to have, and I think we're all going to have this as pilots, is as much as we want this to work, one of the major problems is we're still not going to be able to trust that it's going to work. The vast majority of things that we've learned in the past is we start reporting things because we're trying to do the right thing, and it bites us. And that's the problem. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into my. That kind of leads My concern about this is that if I have a student that I see is in distress, and I care, I'm trying to be empathetic, and I do care about my students. At least I hope I do. But there's HIPAA concerns, for one thing. People do value their privacy. And oftentimes people don't like invasive help. I'm your instructor. I'm going to damn well help you whether you want it or not. I'm going over the top on purpose to illustrate a point. How are we? The reverse stigma, I guess. If I see somebody having issues and I want to help them, and they say, "Stay away from me. Don't help. I got this." How are we going to deal with that? Because clearly there are people who need help who do resist getting help. I think that sums up what I'm trying to say.
I agree with you, and I get that question a lot. For one, is you're not always going to be able to take care of that, right? You're always going to have that combative person. The first thing and foremost is and what I would encourage you all to do, go back to if you have a flight school or employ people that fly, is have this conversation now. If you educate them now and before you've even recognized any symptoms, your people already know that you're watching for it, right? And as for HIPAA concerns, if they come to you, that's one thing. They're going to be able to do whatever you want. Now, if you recognize it, first and foremost, I'd ask your insurance company how they felt about it. If you think someone is having a mental health crisis and they tell you no, you have the ability to pull that they can't fly your plane, right? I know they're not going to like it, but it's until they have I can't say they have to go to the doctor and get a clearance, but until you have proof that they are fit to fly and you don't think so, you have every right to pull that away. Exactly. So it is a hard call, and you never want to make that call. But I've been in that position too, where I had to get someone help and they didn't want it, but they needed it. And by the end they may have been mad at the time, but they're not mad now. I will tell you that. Yep. Anybody else? Yeah. So it depends on the airline. And it's not so much a mental health assessment. The mainline carriers all have their own ways of medicals, right? The regional airlines, no. Most of us do not do any sort of testing other than maybe some basic cognitive testing. But we rely on the FAA to certify them. You know how well that works. Who else?
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Tyler. My name is Sebastián Calle from Halcones Aviation School, a training center down in Colombia. In Halcones, we received approximately 100 to 150 pilots a year and 150 to 200 flight attendants a year. Down there, we have 3 aviation psychologists who specialize in human factors in aviation and conduct admission assessment for our students every time they will study with us. Recently, they have noticed an increase in mental health conditions among applicants, with up to 20% of candidates showing signs of mental health challenge during the admission process. In a society where stress, lack of personal time, and constant focus on work are still often seen as signs of a committed and hardworking person, that is an issue. It can be challenging to address these issues. Additionally, aviation medical examiners sometimes preclude positive interventions by disqualifying applicants early on. From your experience and perspective, what are effective strategies a training center can use to address this issue? Furthermore, what step is the industry taking to improve mental health support for flight crews? Thank you.
So you've got 2 questions there. Can you give me the first one again?
What are effective strategies a training center can use to address the issue of the medical examiners sometimes preclude positive interventions by disqualifying applicants early on? And the second one is, what step is the industry taking to improve mental health support for flight crews?
So I'm going to take your second question first. So to improve mental health of our flight crews, from an airline point of view, is we make sure the tools are there for us. We have mental health training during our NDOC. So we talk about the signs and symptoms. What we also have is what we call our employee assistance program, which provides all of our employees, not just pilots, the ability to get help without having to report exactly what they're getting help for. It's not conducted through the company, it's not by the company, it's a third party, and they can reach out and discuss whatever they want to without fear of retribution. I'm not condoning the fact that people have problems like that, or they need to have that discussion, which they should be having that discussion with their AME as well. However, I would much rather them talk about it than bottle it up and then drink, right? Those are the things that we have to do. We also have a health and wellness employee resource group, which is also a peer support group. It is something that we put together with all of our DE&I initiatives. Throughout, and most companies have ERGs, which allows them to learn more about personal health, what they can do to protect their mental health, how to get help, and how to remain healthy in general. So there are a lot of options that the airlines are doing and have at their fingertips to help their people. Now, for training centers and how to address the situation with, kicking people before they even get into the program. Honestly, I am not sure how to address that situation. I've never run into that where they're doing pre-assessments and saying you can't come. However, I don't disagree with it. If they're already finding that people are not fit to hold a medical or not fit mentally, it's better to stop them now than it is to let them through this program and either A, cause an issue, or B, have a problem later on. Understanding that may be a hard part for your business, especially if you're taking people out of the role early. You're not earning any income on that, but you've already taken the time and effort it's taken to get them in the door, right? That time is money. However, I don't disagree with what they're doing. The safe way is the best way. Hate to say it. Thank you. It is not.
Thank you, Tyler, and Piedmont Airlines. We really appreciate it.